a populist international trend that is sponsored, even that has produced people like President Trump, etc., where eventually we forget that the state has not done its job, and suddenly the simple, let's just build a wall, kick them out, they're sending their rapists, they're sending all of that. I think it's dangerous because not only will it have consequences on citizens, President Trump taught us a very powerful lesson. When you sow hatred, you reap it, but not from foreigners. It ends up with the people marching into the capital, and these are fellow Americans.
Hello there, my name is Soli Moeng. Welcome again to the #1 media company, WorldView. This is where we explore everyone's perspectives on all things that can broaden our worldview. Today, we have the one and only Mmusi Maimane, former leader of the Democratic Alliance, the main opposition party in South Africa. He's also a former pastor at Liberty Church, just like Martin Luther King used to be. I've always wondered where this man got this pulpit voice. Now I know. So Mmusi, I'm so delighted to be speaking to you. And I have to say also, Mmusi is also currently leader of the One South Africa movement. And of course, we want to know where that is going, what he plans to do with it. Has he got presidential ambitions? I hope he does, because that should excite the political trajectory of South Africa heading to the 2024 elections. Mmusi, welcome. I'm really happy to have you here.
Soli, it's my great privilege, and I'm a big fan of your work, your insights, and it's my absolute privilege to be here on this platform, and I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So have you taken time to reflect, to think about things without all the pressure of being in Parliament, facing up the ANC every day since you left the DA?
Yeah, I think the last 2 years have been an amazing opportunity. It's given me time to say, what do we really want to do for this country?
Right.
How do we reform democracy so that it works for more people? It's allowed me to think hard about some of the mistakes we made, and I think we can delve into some of the learnings that have emerged from there. But it also given me the energy to think that come 2024, we must be strong, we must be fit and going. So it's been really a good halftime.
Yeah.
Not a halftime without activity, because of course we participated in the local government elections, but a halftime nonetheless that was necessary to say, how do we launch forward towards 2024? So I'm quite excited, to be honest.
Right. Look, when I speak to my students, I always say there are two kinds of mistakes. There are $10 mistakes and $1 million mistakes. It's okay to make a few $10 mistakes, wake up, stand up, dust off the dirt, and keep walking, because life is about like that. If you make $1 million mistakes, then it gets harder to stand up again.
Sure. No, undeniably. And I think part of public life is that sometimes, let me put it to you this way.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in an era where obviously Jacob Zuma, the ANC, the hypothesis behind that became the central dominant figure in the country.
Right.
And I was grateful that at the time we led the opposition to end up with Jacob Zuma being out, ending up with almost the challenging of what does the African National Congress mean for South Africa?
Right.
But if I'm willing to be honest, I don't think I also invested enough time at saying, well, what then if you had the reins of power, what kind of country would you want to see? I think we all kind of fell into the slipstream of going, if the ANC says it will build houses, we would say we'll build more houses.
Right.
If the ANC says it would eliminate corruption, we said we've eliminated it already. And then if the ANC said we'll fix crime, it was kind of that tick for tat kind of conversation. And where they zigged, we kind of zagged type phenomenon. Now, I think I'm in a much better position to say, in your thinking, what kind of country do you want to see and how does democracy work better? And I think that's always a better frame to think. We have to answer the basic question. What happens after the ANC? What does life after the ANC look like for South Africans?
Right.
And yeah, so I think it's been a very, very costly but a very important exercise to do for my own headspace equally.
Do we need a better ANC or something entirely not ANC in order to take South Africa forward?
Look, firstly, I think the ANC cannot be reformed, right? Secondly, I think the ANC is too old to reform. You know, it has old ideas as a start.
Right.
It has old leadership, which I'm not trying to be ageist. It just means there's a frame upon which many of the ANC's leaders' values were shaped and entrenched well within apartheid. And I don't think they can divorce themselves at thinking that the problem they are still trying to solve is that. And then thirdly, I think more than anything, globally, when you think about the context of leadership and you think about the world we're going into a new terrain that will need new. You can't, even definitions that you used to accept as common cause, a definition around the sovereignty of a country around its own fiscus, is not a concept you can easily accept anymore, because frankly, when you talk cryptocurrency and currencies of the future, well, they are borderless in some ways because they are online. So we must respond to that question. We must respond to it from a tax point of view. When you think about knowledge and education and all of these fundamental questions which sit firmly and squarely at the delivery of what good governments tend to do, that world is changing. So I really don't think we need a better ANC. I really am convinced that we need to build something fresh, something that re-entrenches democracy back into the hands of citizens that can launch a future for South Africa. So that's it.
Hello, everyone. If you're interested in advertising on WorldView, drop us an email at worldview.help@gmail.com. We will send you an advertisement guide, which will include the rates and the process involved. A typical shout out for your company or project will be between 45 and 60 seconds. By advertising on our platform, you'll be supporting a company that wants to improve the public narrative. Once again, send us an email at worldview.help@gmail.com, which you can also find in the description below. Now, back to the interview.
Okay, look, if I were to think in academic terms, the DA, the Democratic Alliance, is almost like your political alma mater. It gave you a voice, it gave you a platform, it sprang you into the public domain in South Africa. Do you have any negative or feelings towards the DA or individuals in the DA looking back after 2-3 years following your departure from it?
Look, I think like anybody else, when we served the DA, I had a vision that wanted to say, how do we build a South Africa for everybody? Okay. And I felt that philosophically, there are now those who are in leadership within the DA who have almost moved away from the ideal of building a South Africa that works for all, instead focused on a party that works for a minority. Now, that is a philosophical difference that meant that we couldn't align on values because there was an inherent belief that said, if we just consolidate minorities and get our numbers, we can have a say in government, but we are not going to govern so that we build a South Africa that works for everybody. So that was the first fight. The second fight is, I thought that in the leadership contestation, it became petty political as opposed to what is in the interest of South Africa. So where I feel negative towards the DA is that it's reduced itself to be a minority party. Others would say a race-based party. I think in certain instances, a regional-based party, in that it focuses almost in the Western Cape and Cape Town, and sometimes thinks like that. So I have a sense upon which I think that's a missed opportunity for a party and the role it ought to play in society, given where its ideological leanings sit. And then I do think that we now have a leadership group within the DA whose disposition is towards minoritism that doesn't help build nationhood. And I couldn't, in good conscience, not only serve under that, but continue to work alongside that for the purposes of the country, because the visions are vastly different.
Yeah, look, my analysis at the time, and it hasn't changed much, and hear me out. I thought when you led the DA, you started having, first of all, the DA had ambitions to become the next governing party in South Africa. That was a push at the time. But it couldn't become that replacement to the ANC without attracting more black votes because of the sheer number of black voters in South Africa. And you can't attract more black voters in South Africa if you don't appeal to some of the things that they hold dear. And I think you were beginning to have those conversations. In my analysis, it's normal that the elections that you left soon after would see a lot of traditional DA people leaving because they were not comfortable with the conversation. That's if you run a company, an organization, you start changing some things. Some people will not want to change, and it's okay. It means that the DA was preparing to rise, right? Once it had begun having those conversations, some people would be left behind, and then you attract more people. There's no way that you can have your cake and eat it. But then I got the feeling that the DA leadership panicked. They said, damn, people are leaving us, but that's okay. It means that you're preparing yourself you can't carry the same weight while you want to fly up. So why didn't you guys have that conversation that said, but it's not, don't look at this as failure. Look at it as preparing to attract more people. But it seems like it was seen as my money failed. Let him go.
I think that's where my disappointment, bitterness, and actually, frankly, unacceptance of some of the leadership that is in place now is that whilst there was an honest reflection at saying there were certain South Africans who were supporters of the DA who actually had greater leanings towards the Freedom Front Plus, if you reflect on the question properly, would not be able to be part of an organization that espoused a broader multiracial organization. We're going to, and there was a reflective point that we had a conversation about that. But when people have ambitions for power, selfishly, without truly having the country's interest at hand, which I guess sometimes is the toxicity of politics.
Right.
And then they fight and mobilize, as you would know, some of the lobby groups, donor base, etc. It created a toxic culture that even a vision for non-racialism couldn't find expression easier going forward. So I happen to think that, to me, this is where I think there's been a disingenuous approach, firstly. And secondly, it then almost became replaced by what seems so noble to say to somebody, we are colorblind. Now, when somebody says that, all of us wake up and we go, oh, that's such a nice idea. Of course, we want to be colorblind in society. Right. And then they start to cite Martin Luther King, say, let them be judged by the content of their character. And all of those things have nice rings to them. Mm-hmm. But it's a misdiagnosis of Martin Luther King as a start, because he was very clear about the sense that in recognizing that, you must appreciate that Black South Africans or African Americans at the time were marginalized. So you need to deal with the banking system, deal with so many other things. And it is true here in South Africa that my recognition of race isn't the immediate positioning of racism, but it's an immediate acknowledgement of the past injustice that then says, if you offer leadership in this country, you need to address those injustices so that we build a nation that can truly be in the sense of economic color blindness, where opportunities are available for all citizens, regardless of the color of their skins. That is the exercise you must do. And the DA now has become lazy to doing that exercise, so much so that they've given up on the task to say, Kolo, we are just colorblind, which means the pain that many Black South Africans feel is not something that is appreciated. That's why even still today, the proof point to this very argument is the fact that the DA will celebrate probably just post a decade or maybe 2 decades of being the government of the Western Cape. Yet many Black South Africans in the Western Cape would not feel that they can vote for the DA in the numbers that they have, regardless of the concept of good governance in that sense, because dignity to a human being is paramount. And that dignity sometimes is linked to, I'm a proud Black South African, and that dignity must be preserved. But I happen to believe that as much as the hypothesis around where the ANC sits, there's a similar sort of disposition to where the DA sits, in that they form part of the old. They form part of those who fought against apartheid, and so that has become their almost rallying point. Now what we need to answer is, how do we create out of what is the 17 million South Africans who are not voting, or equally so those who have an interest in the political trajectory of this country? How do we coalesce them into a new vehicle? And I think there are examples of this that are now happening in Africa. If you think about Zimbabwe, CCC is a new, fresh voice that has been led by Nelson Chamisa. Bobby Wine is a new player in the recent number of years who have come on board, happening in Uganda. UPND in Zambia, as led by Hakainde Hichilema. These are new formations that have literally not even a decade old, who are responding to Africa's challenges for the future. And I think, to me, that's the optimism. And I would put the DA, if you like, in the same mold now as I see some of what the ANC's problems are, which are problems of just aging infrastructure, aging thinking, and a failure to reform.
So you, since you started your One South Africa, two questions for you. One, do you have personal political presidential ambitions for 2024? Secondly, who's giving you the funding to do all this?
So on the first is, let me put a caveat to rallying independence. I've actually also gone ahead and said, let's rally communities. The number one reason, in some ways, I left Parliament, let's not talk about the DA, Parliament itself, is because I told President Ramaphosa that democracy is disengaged from ordinary people. It's become an elite sport. And when there are people protesting outside, as the time it was a gender-based violence protest, they felt that their interests were no longer being the subjects of debate inside that Parliament. And in truth, in all the years I was in Parliament, I thought the unemployed were never discussed. I thought community development was never discussed. But issues of the elite were common cause. You know, so that was the first dilemma. The second is, as I've been going around in various communities, we are identifying new leadership that comes from communities, which I think is a powerful tool of democracy, because now you can introduce new players. So let me take someone like Ken Clark, the leader of the independents in the Eastern Cape, was a business person who ran Twiza, a 2 billion rands company, and we could introduce him into the political world, help him with that. And they ran an incredible campaign. The mayor of Cedarburg, who we worked with, was a farmer, Reuben Richards, who now is standing up and now is the mayor of a town because he's coming back with that experience. So my point at the end of the day is that as I've gone around communities, we've now built a grassroots infrastructure where citizens are saying, let's take back the power. So that's what One South Africa has been set out to do. Now, to the second question, which is, what does it mean for 2024?
No, okay, yeah, go ahead.
When we talk about my own personal ambition, of course, my view is I want to serve this country in a leadership role. And we've now been able to build the grassroots formation. We've been able to build communities, because at the end of the day, what is the purpose of occupying a position if you are unclear in your head to whom it must serve? And I would argue that is, in some ways, part of the dilemma we face with the current leadership.
Who's funding you?
On the funding score, we literally have gone to ordinary people across the country, have brought in money. We've got some business people who have made contributions, but there are not many. And we've wanted to consciously be clear that that community is be at the forefront of the funding mechanism. Okay,
that's good enough. So, Mmusi, many people seem to agree that there's going to emerge a big or broad coalition post-2024. Are there political formations that you would be happily hold hands with? And which ones are those? Are there ones that you would say definitely not? And which ones are those?
Look, I think a centrist view is the line that we coalesce around, which means we need, no economy is not mixed. I think it's naive to say all economies are either one way or another. We're building from an economic vision, we need a centrist view. From a social values point of view, we need parties that uphold the sense of Ubuntu. I would not coalesce with parties that want to advance racial polarization.
So the EFF is out.
You know, so that kind of rhetoric is kind of something that I could not work with. And I'm very loath at this point in time to rule out, to start to point out who and what. I'd rather say, let's shape the values and let people who subscribe to those values come on board. Because here's the big thing, Soli, and I don't want to be political and say, oh, but you're evading the question. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm really conscious of is that there are new ones also being started today.
Right.
So the picture in 2024 is going to be a number, not only of independents, but also political formation who come on board The only question we must answer is how do we get over 50%, and how do we ensure? So now to the ANC question, because often that becomes the big drill. No one knows what is going to happen to the ANC's conference. Now, if the ANC were to split and a moderate group of citizens would emerge out of it, who would say we want to advance a clean government, a capable state, an economy that works for everybody, an education system that empowers citizens, and the upholding of the law and order, then I'm not dismissive of that group of people being able to coalesce as part of the future.
Maybe they'd call themselves something else, not the ANC, maybe.
Yeah, correct. And the ANC as it stands now, in truth, is in fact much more of a mafia state capturing machine than it is in fact a governing party with a vision for the future. So frankly, I would argue the case that let's reform our politics and build something fresh, and that might have new players coming on board.
What about the Action SA? What's your view on working with Action SA? Again,
my sense is I'm unclear really about where their stance on economic issues are, etc. I'm unclear and I'm uncomfortable and actually very not persuaded by their convenient line around how do you manage immigration. I think it's a dangerous posture. I think that, Soli, the value of a human being, regardless of where they come from, is always sacrosanct. We can debate other rights, but we can't debate the dignity of a human being. And that dignity is conferred to both the legal or the illegal person. It's conferred to the foreigner and the national and the local citizen. And I'm uncomfortable about some of the issues.
But you do need to know who is in South Africa, surely. I mean, like we have porous borders. Maybe we're harboring criminals, child molesters in South Africa. We don't know they're in South Africa. Surely we need to have a system, an immigration system that controls that. Everybody in South Africa must be registered. I live here in this country. When I arrived here, I had to go and register myself with the municipality. Actually, I've moved once before. So when I moved from the place where I first arrived into this place where I'm at now, I needed to go and say, hello, my name is Soli Moeng, this is what I do, and I get a letter from the mayor to say, welcome. And then 2 weeks ago, there was a formal ceremony to receive new arrivals into the city. They know I'm here. They know where I live. If I were to change addresses to go somewhere else, the post office will not deliver my mail because I haven't reported. So they know who's in South Africa. You don't know. How do you run a big city if you don't know how many people are there, who's staying there? You can't, just on the basis of humanity, say, let's just anybody come here. You could be harboring criminals.
The issue that you are raising is about the capability of the state. It's got nothing to do with the person themselves. You could, even the people that your neighbor in the country you are at could very well be a criminal. That doesn't mean that that means the state's capability is able to arrest or not to arrest, even if they were a local of the country. The point I'm trying to make is, once you divert your attention away from saying, have we built a state that is capable, that is able to process visas, that is able to ensure that you get that letter, etc., starting with people who are already in the country means that one of these days, somebody could legitimately walk around the streets of any township and say, speak to us in a local language. And if you can't, you must be an immigrant, we'll kick you out. Even a policeman cannot discern the difference between legitimate documents or not, because that's not their competence. That's where border control comes in and controlled immigration and migration. We've got to deal with those issues. We've got to deal with the economic issues. So I don't deny the fact that, of course, we need to do that. But at the end of the day, a populist international trend that is sponsored, even that has produced people like President Trump, etc., where eventually we forget that the state has not done its job. And suddenly the simple, let's just build a wall, kick them out, they're sending their rapists, they're sending all of that. I think it's dangerous because not only will it have consequences on citizens, President Trump taught us a very powerful lesson. When you sow hatred, you reap it, but not from foreigners. It ends up with the people marching into the capital, and these are fellow Americans.
Look,
for South Africa's purposes and for Africa's purposes, we need controlled migration, we need to register people, but we need to have a dialogue. about what human rights are in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, so in all parts of the continent, so that we can manage that issue.
Okay, that leads to my next question, which you almost partly answered. Now, if you're to measure the most powerful politician in South Africa post 2024, what would be your view on foreign affairs, on South Africa's international relations? Maybe let's cut it into two parts. The one is South Africa's relations to Africa, and the other part is globally. How do you position yourself vis-a-vis the West, the East, and globally? What would be the driving force for South Africa's positioning globally?
Look, I mean, I think we mustn't depart from our own constitution. Our own constitution upholds human rights and dignity globally. And where there are violations of human rights, South Africa must be at the forefront of leading the upholding and the maintenance of that. So when it comes to places in Africa where people are violating democratic rights, I fought against Omar al-Bashir, not because I'm trying to be anti-African, but I thought what was going on in South Sudan was something that we could not stand up and support. So we needed to act. And it's the same as what's happening in Eswatini. I've been fighting that battle. It's the same as what's happening in Zimbabwe, where people are violating human rights. South Africa must be at the forefront of the fight against it in the continent and also globally, regardless of where it takes place. But the second value that underpins your foreign policy is your own trade ambitions. Now, South Africa, let me use a real case in point, real life, Russia, Ukraine, as things stand at the moment.
Right.
The dilemma with that issue is that South Africa is taking a position of not only Russia as we know it today, but of the Soviet Union, which is a historic position, given the fact that it now takes a posture against Western democracies, who, when you look at South Africa's trade relations, the top 4 countries come from the West, and the 5th one being China. So I think that is a misdiagnosis of a balancing of human rights coupled with trade ambitions. And I think South Africa missed the boat on that. So my foreign policy position says, let's define what our economic trade objectives are, and let's uphold human rights. And I think let's take that position going forward.
Yeah. Look, sometimes as a state, you need to be able to decide whether you look at the world from the lens of human rights or from the lens of state interests. And sometimes something might be good for state as a matter of state interest, but in terms of human rights, you want support. I give you an example. South Africa a number of years ago abstained from a United Nations vote on the protection of the human rights of LGBTIQ plus communities. And when the minister at the time was asked, but why? You guys have enshrined these rights in your constitution. How do you go out there and not defend them? Her response was, well, we as South Africa, we don't want to be seen to be walking too far ahead of our African peers. I personally thought it was nonsense. What do you think? I mean, should we walk on rights simply because African peers don't want to respect those rights?
I think it's a dangerous position, because not only what are you saying about your own constitution when your own constitution can be undermined in that sense. And secondly, I think that we've failed leadership in Africa. South Africa is a large economy. Yeah. It has massive infrastructure and interests in the continent. We must lead. But we've relegated the ANC's part of its failures has been that its foreign policy positions exist as the economists defined it, as though the Berlin Wall is still up. They are so archaic that they fail to see how do we advance rights and how do we lead through those rights. Because at the end of the day, it's in that same name that we've protected and watched. Today is Africa Day. The role of the African Union has been silent when atrocities have been occurring democratically in the interests of brotherhood. When elections are being rigged, South Africa says, well, we respect the sovereignty of that country. I go, what country worth its salt fails to lead when it's called upon to do so?
Yeah.
So I just think we need to consider strongly South Africa's leadership role in the continent, because if we fail that exercise, it will be surrendered to others. And I already am seeing now countries like Kenya, countries like Ethiopia, countries who are already starting to become attractive to the global community because they are very much in the interests of economic trade plus the upholding of human rights.
Thank you. Now let's come back home. BEE, what is your view on, let me put it this way, race-based policies in South Africa?
Well, I think equity and equity participation is important. Now, I use those terms not because I think
What does it mean? Can you define equity participation?
Yeah, I'll define it. Triple B and triple B double E as a policy has been, in some ways, it's gone through multiple iterations. Now it's at a point where I think there's some elements of abuse coming out of it. So we need to write. Right. Let's recognize a few things. The first is South Africa's history is such that Black South Africans have been left out of economic participation, educational outcomes, etc. What are we trying to fix for? We're trying to fix for a country that ultimately is inclusive of all races and can prosper together, which means that we have to invest in equity positions that allow for those who are left out to be included. And I would argue this case. So let's take education, because often we think of triple BEE only in economic terms. Let's think about education. What if we said to ourselves, if your child, if you are a child whose parents never had an opportunity to go to university, it is logical that emerging from that position, it is likely you are a Black child, and furthermore, that your parents were not able to get you into university because they financially are not able to do so. The state and the private sector must be able to say, how do we fund that child's tuition so that they can participate? That is broadening the inclusion conversation so that more citizens can participate.
What do you say to a white child from a poor family who can afford to take them to university? Do you say, sorry, you're white, you can't?
No, of course, in the midst of that, I think that those cases are few and rare, to be honest.
No, we're not talking numbers, Maimane. There's a child who is white South African, who comes from a poor white South African family, who presents herself or himself with potential. Do you say to them, because you're white, let's not numbers?
No. Of course, that's not the point. The point is that child must also get assistance as they would. NSFAS is not, in this instance, it's available for that same child. I'm talking about equity measures that are focused on intervention that say, here's what we're trying to fix. I will never be part of a country that eventually says, by virtue of, because at the end of the day, I want all citizens to thrive. And that is a vision that includes white South Africans equally so. So I'm not dismissing that point. Of course, white kids in this country who are poor must be included in the programs that ensure that they can participate. We've got to fix the whole. But where I'm saying the urgency and the pain still sits in many Black communities for many different reasons. We've got to be able to fix those. And equity is a part of the exercise. And I would like for white South Africans to say to themselves also, they can be part of that conversation, part of contributing to that, rather than companies sitting back and saying, let's give shareholding to Maimane and Sons because they're few. Let's rather ask, where is that shareholding going to employees so that more people can participate? We're not only income unequal in this country, but we are asset unequal. So how do we ensure that there's a transfer that keeps our society stable over a long run? We fail that exercise, we will build multiple South Africas. And when I say I want to build one South Africa, I truly mean all citizens, Black and white, must participate not only in the justice component of the country, but also in the prosperity of the country.
Let's suppose a white student who is now today, as I speak to you, 21, 22, 23 years old, born obviously after the end of apartheid, starts a business. Do you say to them, you got to give a share of your business to a Black child? So if you want to benefit from government deals?
But that's where BEE has been pernicious, in that it's insisted on that kind of mechanism. And what I'm saying is that that's a challenge. Well, clearly it's unworkable, right? So I don't take that position. I'm simply saying to that child, to that business, as I would to a Black business of the same ilk standards, the same descriptors you are saying, is that if you are employing people over a certain number, you must be clear that not only is it a conversation about equity, it's about consciousness and capitalism. That where are your ESGs? What is your contribution to society broadly?
Okay.
That would be a conversation for everybody.
Right. That's fair enough. Let's talk about education, Mmusi. We know that our education system has gone through hills and valleys, and I don't know where it's at now. Now there are rumors of the minister questioning the positioning of science and mathematics, the pass rate. What would you change if you were president of South Africa in terms of our education system? Are you happy with the pass rate, for instance, where it's at?
It's woeful. It is one of the failures of this government that doesn't get highlighted enough, but it is probably, in my humble opinion, a greater steer than what state capture would look like. I'll say that categorically, because I think they are really stealing from the future of this country. That's my view of this education system. A couple of things that are crucial. The first is that at ECD centers, which is where kids start education, we've failed woefully in that actually many of our kids, once they hit the age of 10, cannot read for meaning. So what I would do is reallocate budgetary resources, increases them from the current 2 billion rands to just well over at least 200 billion rands, to ensure that we can raise the quality of early childhood development. Because if we fail at that, we failed at the foundations of the future. I would narrow curriculum so that it really has a higher emphasis on STEM subjects. And then at the secondary level, I would increase the pass rate, the rate to pass a subject from 30% progressively year on year to well over 50% to 50%, because I can't prove competence at 30%. And that's what the government says. It says, if you are a subject, you do it at 30%, you are competent. You can't. I would never go to a doctor who understands biology at 30%. It'd be madness. So how do I increase the pass rate towards that? And then ultimately at higher schools, I'd also the mechanism of assessment, which is how do we introduce things like internships and focused skills-based learning. I would really put an emphasis on. The last thing I'd say is this, is that I want to add an additional year post-school that says that for all children, they can be able to qualify for 6-month internship and 6 months practical learning. Because what that does is that it lets learners not only share values in society, but be able to participate in sectors they wouldn't. That is also a fundamental part of the education system that we've got to reform.
Look, we underestimate the capacity of human beings by the way we're doing things the ANC way in South Africa. During apartheid, we needed 51% to pass. Where I teach now, you need 70% to pass. People can do things if you give them the challenge and the resources to do what they need. In South Africa, there's also a cry for, especially people in rural areas, children in impoverished areas, and who, for instance, would have girls who don't have access to sanitary pads, and the impact of that on their ability to stay at school throughout the year, and obviously on the results at the end of the year. How do we solve that?
Sure, and I mean, in part, this is where we need strong public and private partnerships. In the regard that I actually think that the Ministry of Social Development is a complete joke, in that it has failed in its mandate precisely for those issues. So to our earlier conversations about equity and participation and all of that, imagine if you said to a company of those same young people you were talking about, that part of your contribution to society, whatever we call it, ESG, whatever we look at, or social impact, you must be able to adopt the following schools in your community and make sure no child doesn't go to school because they don't have sanitary towels, and government will match you rand for rand. One of the things I've wanted to do is to create a justice, I call it a Jobs and Justice Fund. That's a national fund that companies can contribute towards. You use that not only for interventions and funding new startups that are coming up so that we can increase economic participation, but you use that equally so to deal with some of the social challenges that we face, such as ensuring that sanitary towels are included, because that speaks to the question of dignity.
But who would manage that fund? Government?
I would create, no. It would be a partnership of board members. I would want, in the same way, in some ways, I guess some of what the Solidarity Fund's management practices have come on board, and that you attract directorships from the private sector, you mix them with the public sector interests, and as the president, you can hold a deciding vote as to how it goes, but you must make sure that that board is capacitated with people from the private sector, not only to increase trust, but to ensure that it's effective in what it does in partnership with government. And I saw this in Colombia, they started doing this, and I'm seeing it in various countries that are of a similar size to us as to how they respond to these, to some of these.
But Maimane, I think we tend to overrate the private sector, and I'm not saying there's no value in the private sector. If you look at state capture and much of corruption that happens in South Africa, there are private sector players. The banks in South Africa have not told us why they've allowed Zupta monies to go through them. The audit firms, the accounting industry in South Africa has played. they looked away when they could have said, wait a minute, let's raise a red flag here. So my view is that where you have human beings, you need strong checks and balances, irrespective of whether you're private sector or, because people in the private sector like to point fingers at government. I was in South Africa a few weeks ago, in April. I got robbed. People with guns and knives took my bike. And I got to learn that there are companies like bicycle shops or currency converters, and those people. So there's a whole black market of private business who are involved in facilitating, in enabling crime. All these cables that get stolen from our infrastructure, from Eskom infrastructure, some of them end up in being sold by small businesses. So there's a lot of work to be done in South Africa, and we cannot trust people because they're just from the private sector.
No. That's why when even the composition of the board, I wanted to strike a balance between public and private, with the presidency having a deciding vote. But I think you make a very important point. Of course, it's not the glorification of the private sector almost exclusively for the reasons you've highlighted. But again, all citizens are private citizens. And what I think has been one of the things that have been ignored in this country is that state capture was the hollowing out of government,
right?
So that the capability of the state to prosecute, to arrest, to make sure the people who stole your bike can end up in prison and that we can follow them. That's all been eroded. And the project, even post the so-called state capture years, because I actually don't think there's a post-state capture. The ANC's actual function was to capture the state. They stated in their National Democratic Revolution. All that happens is that once you've captured the state in that way, you move on to the judiciary, etc. And then all the criminals need to do, who are private citizens, come in and capture a few individuals, and then tenders are being funneled out. The question we must ask is, how do we recapacitate the rebuilding of the state? It's not even the bureaucrats in this instance. It's just the state's leadership. So frankly, when you think about issues of crime, you have to then say to yourself, why is it that the conviction rate around murder is so low in this country, right? When you come to other agencies, if you and I, to our earlier immigration conversation, we're trying to get an ID from the Home Affairs, that's 2 days. You have to spend a line there. That's economic participation that you are taking out. So the capability of the state to prosecute, to create a criminal justice system must be rebuilt. Because if we fail to do that, then I think it becomes just money lying around for anyone to take.
Yeah, so it's not just a matter of replacing Sori with my money. It's a matter of looking at the checks, the systems as well. How did we believe that we have all these awesome democratic institutions in South Africa, and then it took just a matter of putting the wrong people at the heads of those institutions for them to be corrupted and weakened as they are? It means that it's not just a matter of the person that you place at the top, it's the ability of the person by the systems in place to do things that they shouldn't be doing.
And that's where, at the starting point, when we ask citizens to go vote, we mustn't say to them, go give the person a mandate. We must also say to them, also build a capability to give a check to that mandate.
Right.
So that's the relationship of democracy. I vote for you, but I'm also coming to check. So, for example, citizens in this country have no mechanisms to recall a member of parliament who's not doing their job.
It's nonsense.
So if we're going to have an electoral reform program, it is to build the check and balance, so that if Charlotte Maxeke Hospital, I always use this example, burnt down a year or two ago. Yeah. The hospital is now over capacity. But who is the individual accountable for that? And can citizens who live in Johannesburg be able to come back and say, we want to recall? That's why I've been fighting for electoral reform. Not so that independents can participate, but so that accountability can be brought back to citizens. That's on one score. But on the second score, how do we build the capability of the state by appointing people to the state who are competent? Because cadre deployment or cadre state capture deployment, because that's really what it is. It's when you then say, you know nothing about energy, but we'll send you there to go run a power station.
It's your turn to eat. That's what it is.
It's really your turn to eat.
Yeah.
Creates environments upon which incompetence breeds corruption. And I think sometimes we don't talk enough about the competence of people we've got. There are some incredible bureaucrats that I'm a big champion of. I support. I want them to work well. But in truth, they end up with leadership that is weak, that has been sent to do a different job. And like anybody, if people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. So what's been happening is that there's been a mass immigration or exiting out of the public service by very competent people, that even when you run accounting firms or the auditor general or the very checks and balances that we put in the state, it is staffed by people who are weak. Let me say just this last thing, and I know I want to highlight this point. When Thuli Madonsela took over as a public project, as she started to demonstrate the competence of her work, her reflection on the issue was that actually she was inundated by professionals who now wanted to work in public prosecution in that sense. Now, so I don't want to be dismissive of this point, that when you send and you appoint the right people to institutions, because their leadership is so strong in those institutions, they attract strong people also, because there's a dignity in working for a place and you can serve and the most competent come in. Speak to any young person from any top school in this country and ask them if they want to work for a government department. Many of them will tell you no. Now that's a problem, because we want the best working for the state. Economies that have succeeded, the Asian tigers, have succeeded on the back of the fact that the most competent feel it their greatest honor to serve the state. And that's what, and I'm not being statist. I'm just simply saying.
No, I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you. Do you think Shamila Batohi is the right NDPP for South Africa right now?
At this stage in time, looking at a track record, I had all hopes for Shamila. I thought that she would do a really good job. I'm becoming less and less convinced that that's the case, given the state of prosecutions and the leadership that has been falling out. So what I think we need to do is, when we rebuild the entire criminal justice system, the Act actually makes provision for the appointment of more SIUs, so that actually one of the mistakes of state capture was that it became an inquiry rather than a prosecutorial method that comes into it. They only bolted that on later. So we've got to put prosecutorial power into that upfront, so that people know that this is an actual process that's on the go, broaden the capability of the National Prosecuting Authority, and ensure that actually that when those cases come on board, even at lower courts level, there's efficacy in who the prosecution takes place. So at this point in time, the institution, I think, is struggling, and we need to broaden it, capacitate it, fund it better, and ensure that more SIUs are in place, so that you not only are dealing with complicated crimes that sometimes get lumped onto the courts because the political power is failing to do its job.
Right. Mmusi, you touched on my next point a little bit. I just want to explore it further. Now, in November or December this year, we have the next electoral conference of the African National Congress. We know that the RET people, all those baddies who coalesce around Jacob Zuma, are gunning for Ramaphosa. Ramaphosa has been a weak president, in my view. There's no leadership in there. That is my view, of course. Do you wish for Ramaphosa to come out the winner, so that he leads the ANC to the what I hope will be a 2024 electoral Armageddon for the ANC? Or doesn't it matter for you who emerges the winner in December 2022?
It does matter. And this is a very difficult position, because in some ways the short answer is that, frankly, I think the ANC needs to be voted out. I happen to think so. But I also am very clear about the fact that we are in the continent of Africa, where if people who are not trained in upholding constitutionalism and the rule of law amass power, because if someone else other than Ramaphosa was to win, we know, as is practice in the ANC, that he will be removed. A new person, whoever that person is, will come on. If that person is not a constitutionalist, then it does put into doubt the free and the fairness of the elections in 2024.
Right.
The rules could change. Whereas at this point in time, for all the flaws that I think President Ramaphosa has, the one thing I would say, at least he understands, given his training as a lawyer, as a drafter of the Constitution, is that he will uphold constitutionalism. And he also, given this practice, when the ANC lost elections in the local government elections, it wasn't obstinate at saying that power must change. Actually wanted to sit back and say, this is the will of the people, let change occur, however way it takes place. And I would think that you need that kind of leadership in 2024. Otherwise, you could cast those elections in a dim light. And I think Africa has taught us too many lessons in this regard. I don't endorse him because I just happen to endorse him because I endorse the Constitution, and we need someone at the helm who can protect it.
But yeah, I hear you. Ramaphosa is a difficult, it's almost like a moving target, isn't it? Because, he has been quiet in moments in South Africa when he shouldn't. He acts under pressure. Look at the SAA deal. What's going on there? Why is he quiet? He needed to be pushed by South Africans to say to the Minister Mtetwa, dude, move away from this flag thing. Children are dying in hospitals in South Africa. There's so much poverty. Levels of crime are high. People are in pain in South Africa, and we have a governing or misgoverning, I call it, African National Congress that thinks it's okay to give money to keep giving more 350 million rands to Cuba. Yesterday the Minister of Defense stood up and said, we don't have money. We don't have money to do the things that you want us to do. But they spent almost 250 million rands on Cuba. What's going on? What are the priorities of this guy? And the president doesn't say these things. As leader of the ANC in South Africa, he doesn't stand up and say, wait a minute, that is not wrong. He needs to be pushed first. Even when we push him on many things, he doesn't stand up.
Totally. And I think the origin of the problem, as you've described it, is that, frankly, and I raised it earlier as we were speaking, is to say, you best know when you occupy the highest office in the land what you want to do with that office. Right. Because if you are unclear about what you want to do, then we must all concede. All you want is the title, not the job. And because he's got the title and unclear about the job, things like flags happen and they seem to be okay because unclear. Well, is it a priority? Is it not a priority? If you said to me, I've got 5 priorities. I've got to fix education. I've got to fix the economy. I've got to build the capability of the state, make sure citizens are safe, and fix the healthcare. Those are my 5 priorities. If you then walk into office and say, I'm going to fix those things, anybody who acts against the interest of those 5 things must be chopped off, in my view. You can't have, so the 22 million rand flag is a contradiction to those 5 priorities that we shouldn't have Natim Tetra. Natim Tetra, in my humble opinion, including that cabinet, really, he had failed at police when he was the Minister of Police and Marikana was occurring. And now he's doing the same at arts and culture. What's so sacred about him? Kick him off. We are waiting for people to be corrupt and public pressure to rise up around corruption. Then we fire them. But there are people who have been stewards of the economy of South Africa, and the unemployment level is such that it's the highest now, at least in the world, one of the highest. Right. And we sit back and we say those people can keep their jobs. Frankly, it's because we have a leadership that is unclear about its priorities. The ANC has a vision for yesterday, not a vision for tomorrow. And naturally, because as a country, President Motlanthe has said it, we are on autopilot, and it doesn't matter who occupies the highest office in the ANC. They seem to allow things to carry on because they are unclear about what their priorities are themselves.
But Mmusi, you opening an honestness now here by citing Motlanthe. Motlanthe is the man who was sent to prepare the road for Zuma. He is the man who fired a respected NDPP advocate, Mmusi Maimane. He gave him an option after Mbeki had suspended him. He said, dude, I'm happy to give you a job provided you don't touch Zuma. Because he said, no, you can't ask, I have to act without fear, favor, prejudice or favor. And then Motlanthe said, well, sir, goodbye. He kicked him out. Motlanthe is the same man who oversaw the undoing of the Scorpios. I'm tired of all these old ANC people who were there, who enabled the wrong things to happen against the interests of South Africa and who come up in their retirement as sages, who have the answers to our questions, to the problems that we have. Motlanthe is not a response. Even Mbeki is not an answer to South Africa. Nobody from the ANC is an answer to South Africa. We need to move away from thinking that all the problems from South Africa will have solutions coming from ANC people, whether they're alive or they're dead.
I only cite them because in many ways, they are in the belly of the beast of the ANC. As for the purpose of the country, I've been unambiguous here. I really am not convinced. The ANC is done. It doesn't exist, actually. In truth, if you were to say, where are the branches of the ANC? Go to any community. They are not there. When you say, what's the plan? I've been reading through some of the economic policy documents. They don't have a plan. They don't have priorities. So to me, the only day anyone is ever going to get arrested in this country, where this country will begin to prosper, is when we truly live in a post-ANC, post-liberation era politique. Because I happen to also think that part of the dilemma is that when I look at some of the opposition, I'm not convinced often that they are that dissimilar to the ANC.
Yeah.
And so that poses a threat where you could change the colors that sit in government, but change very little. So when I raise this issue about newness and freshness that must come on, it requires citizens. The new coalition is not going to be just party coalition. It must also be citizen coalition, a bit like the UDF.
Right.
Because in truth, if you don't do that, you could just end up with a state capture of a different kind.
Yeah.
What we need is also to invite civic society, invite people in the private sector. Why is it? And I don't think, there are many examples I could cite who sit in civic society who you could bring on to say, I actually think this person would make a far better Minister of Justice because they'd served in the bench and they're not political attaches. They must rather come and serve as the Minister of Justice. Why can't you do that?
Yeah, I suppose.
So we need co-governance.
Yeah, I hope that part of the reform that you're talking about is ensuring that we don't have a system where a president reports first to a political party, which is what it is now. I mean, Ramaphosa and all the other presidents we've had are deployees of a political party. And you spoke to this, all the people that we call public representatives are not really public representatives, they are party representatives. When the party says you're going to say to defend Zuma, irrespective of the crimes he's committed against South Africa, they defend Zuma.
And when we talk about electoral reform, is to address that. I long for a country one day where we can, in fact, directly elect the president. Yeah. Because then in that instance, that president knows undeniably, not that it's a panacea for all problems, but that president knows that their first constituents are the people before it is their party. Because in truth, one of my frustrations with Parliament, what has Parliament done in the last 2 years in the midst of COVID? It has overseen and allowed an executive to use the Disaster Management Act, not only to advance laws that citizens don't always agree on, but furthermore, to be able to loot funds, and Parliament has done nothing.
Yeah, that's fair. So South Africa clearly needs to be liberated again, this time from the African National Congress. Mmusi, last question to you. Is there a question that you hoped I would ask you when you came here and that I haven't asked you? It's something that you want to say. What is your last message?
I think my message is, when I think about South Africa, I think we don't talk enough about our economic woes, and we don't talk enough about our intra-Africa relations.
Right.
We suffer from what Noam Chomsky puts to say we have debates that are vigorous about certain things, but we ignore some of the systemic issues that are occurring.
Yeah.
I would hope that actually the conversation we can have is how do we fix our economy? How do we make sure that economy works for more, not only from a redress point of view, but also from a growth point of view? What are some of the future issues that South Africa must be confronting in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of even issues around climate change? How do we have those conversations? Because what we are contesting for here, at some level, is the removal of the ANC, but on another greater level is the future of South Africa. And if we can't be clear about that, we won't be clear on the continent. And so when you say we must be re-liberated again, part of it is also refinding ourselves again, because we've lost our values. I speak genuinely, not only from a pulpit preachy point of view, but we've normalized things that are foreign to me at times. We are seeing the social issues in communities, they are breaking down. So, when I think about, so it might not be seen to be linked to education. But for example, more than half the children who are born in this country are registered to single mothers. That's not a policy issue. That's just a values issue. Now, it might sound preachy, but I can assure you that child's prospects in the schooling system are already hampered. And I think to us, we've got to get back to not only a self-discovery of what it means to be truly an African in this continent as a global citizen, and furthermore to say we have a vision for an economy that works for everybody.
Okay, I do have a last question for you. You prompted it, preachiness. I know that you're a man of the cloth, or at least you used to be. South Africa is a secular democracy. Do you think religion should play a role in the state, or it should be kept in the private homes and decisions of individuals?
No, I think individuals have the right to make their decisions. That's what the Constitution, what God you choose to worship, what faith you choose to subscribe to it's a private matter. But where I think all faiths tend to agree is on the question of values. And I think values must be societally led, because the very country you are in fact, in Scandinavian countries, prove the point profoundly, that when society can agree on values, and many of those values were led by people like Soren Kierkegaard, and many of those who brought some of those values, brought them for the very purpose of saying, if you can't police everything, if there's a crime problem, someone must be able to say, hey, Solly dropped their wallet at the train station. I'm going to go find out how I can get this back to Solly. It
happens here where I live, heavily.
But that's because values are infused in society to say, who we are is about the care of other human beings. We've got to build that back here. I think they call it building. I've got to get the exact words for it. There's a sense upon which there's communal values. And South Africa today, that cannot always define itself as what does it mean to be a South African? And I think, to me, in the midst of racism, polarization, all of those issues, we must, as leaders, stand up and say, that's not who we are. Who we are is actually people who are, and it's true, actually. We are people who are generous. We are people who are hardworking. We are people who are, in some ways, socially conservative. But in the main, to be South African is to be generous in spirit. And I think if we build those values in society, we'll find that other issues like crime, making sure kids stay at school, and all of those things become things that are worked out and are policed by the people themselves, not by the state.
Yeah, but there must be leadership from the front. All brands, even in the country brands, are led from the front. Somebody must set the tone. And right now, we are rudderless. Nobody's setting the tone. Nobody's saying we can't be throwing newspapers and cans all over the place. It's a simple thing. But South Africans just throw stuff. And nobody at the front is saying, wait a minute, why do you do that?
Yeah. That's why I want to serve this country, because I think not only have we lost our vision, but we've lost our values. And I want to be able to bring a combination of those two things, because then when you've got those two things, you can truly derive the value of Africa, because then there's so much.
You and I can go on forever. I'm so tempted to ask so many other things, but I absolutely love this discussion. And I really have, and I appreciate you coming to join me for the discussion. I'm sure a lot of people are going to enjoy it as well. And for those of us who've been watching, who are still with us till the end of this discussion, it means that you've enjoyed it, you've enjoyed me learning so much, you learning so much from Mmusi, hopefully having your own perspectives being broadened and your worldviews enriched even further. If you have loved the discussion, please continue sharing the discussion on your pages. Visit us at worldview.com. Support the platform as best as you can. Mmusi, thank you very much. And of course, to everybody else, this is Solly Moeng. I'll see you again in our next discussion.